Hello and welcome to this peaceful corner of the universe. Today we'll embark on an extraordinary journey through millions of years, exploring one of the most fascinating stories ever told, that of how we went from apes to human beings. No rush, no race. Let the gentle rhythm of this narration accompany you, whether you're here to relax, reflect, or simply let yourself be lulled to sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to know where in the world you're following us from and what time it is locally. Share your location in the comments below. It's always inspiring to see how far this humble, sleepy channel reaches. And if you enjoy this gentle exploration of our evolutionary history, whether you stay awake until the end or fall asleep by the second chapter, I invite you to leave a like or subscribe. Your support helps sustain this peaceful journey through time, and I would be truly grateful. As we begin our adventure, a gentle reminder. Nothing in this video should be considered medical advice. If you're experiencing persistent sleep difficulties or have health problems, it's always advisable to consult a healthcare professional. Now relax your body and ease your mind. We're about to embark on a journey through the history of our species. A story that begins not with modern humans, but with creatures that inhabited the African forests millions of years ago. Imagine going back in time, way back, to about 7 million years ago. Africa looks very different from today. Lush forests stretch for great distances, interrupted here and there by open grasslands. In these habitats lived creatures that weren't exactly apes, but not humans either. They were something in between, our starting point in this incredible evolutionary journey. The story of human evolution is not a straight and simple line. On the contrary, it looks more like a branching tree with many branches extending in different directions. Some of these branches have led to modern great apes, such as chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. Other branches, those that particularly interest us tonight, have led to us, to modern humans. About 7 million years ago, something significant happened. A group of primates began to separate from the ancestors we would share with chimpanzee. This separation didn't happen in a day or a year. It was a gradual process that unfolded over hundreds of thousands of years. Populations divided geographically, adapting to different environments, developing unique characteristics that would eventually distinguish them as separate lineages. One of the first members of this separating group was a being called Sahelanthropus chadensis. Known from a fossil skull discovered in Chad, this ancient relative lived about 7 million years ago. Although much of its skeleton remains unknown, the position of the hole at the base of the skull where the spinal cord connects suggests it may have walked upright, at least partially. This is a significant feature because the ability to walk on two legs, called bipedalism, would become one of the distinctive traits of the human lineage. Moving forward in time, we encounter other creatures that show this interesting combination of ape-like features and more human features. Ardipithecus ramidus, which lived about 4.5 million years ago, offers us a fascinating glimpse of these ancient relatives, nicknamed Arde. This being still showed many features suited to life in the trees, its long curved fingers perfect for grasping branches. However, the structure of its pelvis and leg bones indicate it could also walk upright on the ground. Think of these creatures as pioneers who were exploring a new way of moving through the world. The forest hadn't disappeared, and they hadn't completely abandoned it yet. They still spent time among the trees, perhaps sleeping there for safety, looking for fruit and shelter, but they were also beginning to spend more time on the ground, moving on two legs through the more open areas. Why this change? Why evolve to walk upright when their ape relatives were doing just fine moving on all fours? This is a question that has fascinated scientists for decades, and there's no single, simple answer. Some theories suggest that walking upright allowed them to see over tall grass in the savannas, spotting predators or food opportunities from greater distances. Others propose that it freed their hands to carry food, tools, or small children. Walking on two legs might also have been more energy efficient for covering long distances, allowing these creatures to cover more ground while searching for resources in changing environments. There's also the intriguing possibility that bipedalism was linked to social behavior. Standing upright might have made an individual more imposing, useful for social interactions or for deterring predators. Perhaps a combination of all these factors slowly pushed these early hominids, as we call our ancient human relatives, toward upright walking. Whatever the exact reason, bipedalism gradually took root, and once this trait began to evolve, it opened up new possibilities. The hands, no longer needed for walking, could be used for other purposes, a development that would have profound consequences in the millions of years to come. Moving forward about 1 million years, we arrive at one of the most famous fossils ever discovered. In November 1974 in Ethiopia, a team of researchers led by Donald Johanson discovered the partial skeleton of a female that would change our understanding of human evolution. They named her Lucy after the Beatles song that was playing in their camp that evening. Lucy belonged to a species called Australopithecus afarensis and lived about 3.2 million years ago. She was small, only about 1.1 meters tall and weighed about 29 kilograms. But despite her modest size, Lucy was extraordinary. Her skeleton revealed a fascinating combination of features. Her skull was small, similar to that of a chimpanzee, indicating a brain not much larger than that of modern apes. Her arms were relatively long and her fingers curved, suggesting she still spent some time in the trees. But her pelvis and leg bones told a different story. Lucy's pelvis was wide and bowl-shaped, very different from the narrow and elongated pelvis of a chimpanzee. This shape was perfect for supporting body weight in an upright position. Her femur bones, the thigh bones, were angled inward from the hips to the knees. This angle, called the bicondylar angle, is crucial for walking upright, bringing the feet under the body's center of gravity and creating stability while walking. Additionally, Lucy's knee joint locked straight, a typical feature of upright walkers. And in structure and orientation, her pelvis resembled that of a modern human more than that of an ape. The discovery of Lucy was a watershed moment in paleoanthropology. Here was clear evidence of a creature that walked upright millions of years ago, long before brains had grown to modern human size. This challenged earlier ideas that suggested large brains came first in human evolution. Lucy showed us that bipedalism came first, that our ancestors were walking upright while their brains were still relatively small. Lucy wasn't alone. Other fossils of Australopithecus afarensis have been found, giving us a clearer picture of what these creatures were like. They lived in groups, probably in fairly open environments mixed with woodlands. They likely foraged for plant foods, fruits, leaves, seeds, and perhaps occasionally scavenged or caught small animals. Their teeth show a diet that was fairly generalized, not specialized for tough plant materials like some other early hominids, but versatile enough to take advantage of various food sources. Moving forward another 1 million years or so, we encounter a proliferation of different hominin species. This period, between about 2 and 3 million years ago, saw what scientists call an adaptive radiation, where multiple species evolved to occupy different ecological niches. There was Australopithecus africanus in southern Africa, with a slightly larger brain than Lucy's species. There was Paranthropus, a genus that included several species with massive jaws and huge molars, adapted for chewing tough plant materials. These robust Australopithecines, as they're sometimes called, had a specialized diet and anatomy. Their skulls often had a crest on top, called a sagittal crest, which provided attachment points for massive chewing muscles. They were evolutionary experiments in a particular dietary direction, and while successful for a time, these species eventually went extinct without leaving descendants. But around 2.5 million years ago, something new appeared. A creature with a significantly larger brain and a new behavior that would change everything: tool making. This is where the genus Homo, our own genus, enters the story. The earliest members of Homo, sometimes called Homo habilis or handyman, showed a clear increase in brain size compared to earlier Australopithecines. Their brains were around 600 to 700 cubic centimeters, compared to the 400 to 500 cubic centimeters of Australopithecines. This might not sound like a huge difference, but in evolutionary terms it was significant. More importantly, associated with Homo habilis fossils are stone tools. These earliest tools, called Oldowan tools after Olduvai Gorge, where they were first found, were simple flaked stones. A rock would be struck with another rock to create a sharp edge, producing a simple cutting tool. These tools might look crude to our modern eyes, but they represented a cognitive leap. Making even a simple stone tool requires planning, understanding of how materials fracture, hand-eye coordination, and the ability to imagine the final product before it exists. What were these tools used for? Primarily for processing food. Cut marks on animal bones from this period show that early Homo was using stone tools to butcher animal carcasses, cutting through tough hides to access meat. This access to meat, a high-quality concentrated source of protein and fat, may have been one of the factors that allowed brains to grow larger. Brains are energetically expensive organs, using about 20% of the body's energy despite being only about 2% of body weight. A diet that included more meat provided the calories and nutrients to support larger brains. With Homo habilis, we see the beginning of a feedback loop that would characterize human evolution. Better tools led to better nutrition. Better nutrition supported larger brains. Larger brains enabled more sophisticated tools, and so the cycle continued. But Homo habilis wasn't the only player in this story. Around 2 million years ago, a new species appeared that would be even more successful. Homo erectus, upright man. Homo erectus was in many ways a breakthrough species. They were taller than earlier hominids, with some individuals reaching heights of 1.8 meters or more, close to modern human averages. Their bodies were more streamlined, adapted for long-distance walking or running in open environments. Their brains were significantly larger, ranging from about 800 to over 1,000 cubic centimeters. They made more sophisticated tools, including the distinctive hand axe, a teardrop-shaped tool that required more planning and skill to create than earlier Oldowan tools. But perhaps most significantly, Homo erectus was the first hominin to leave Africa. Fossils of Homo erectus have been found across Asia, from Georgia in the Caucasus to Java in Indonesia to China. These migrations out of Africa began around 1.8 to 2 million years ago and continued in waves over hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine these journeys. Groups of Homo erectus, probably extended family groups, moving gradually across landscapes, following resources, adapting to new environments. This wasn't a single migration or a purposeful journey to a distant goal. It was a gradual expansion, each generation moving a little further, settling in new areas, adapting to new climates and ecosystems. In adapting to these new environments, Homo erectus populations may have evolved new traits. We see variation in Homo erectus fossils across their range, with some scientists arguing these represent different species or subspecies. In any case, Homo erectus was remarkably successful, lasting as a species for nearly 2 million years, far longer than our own species has existed so far. One of the most important innovations associated with Homo erectus is the controlled use of fire. Evidence of fire use dates back to at least 1 million years ago, possibly earlier. Fire provided warmth, protection from predators, light in the darkness, and crucially, a way to cook food. Cooking food makes it easier to chew and digest, extracting more calories and nutrients. This would have been another factor supporting the continued expansion of brain size. Fire also had social implications. A fire creates a gathering point, a center for the group. Sitting around a fire in the evening, early humans might have strengthened social bonds, shared information, told stories. Some researchers speculate that the social dynamics around fire may have contributed to the development of more complex communication, perhaps even early forms of language. Speaking of language, when did humans start to talk? This is one of the most difficult questions in human evolution because language doesn't fossilize. We can't directly observe when our ancestors started using complex spoken language. We can make inferences from anatomy. The position of the larynx, the voice box, affects what sounds can be produced. The development of a descended larynx, which modern humans have, allows for a greater range of sounds. We can also look at the hypoglossal canal, the opening in the skull through which the nerve that controls the tongue passes. A larger canal might suggest more precise tongue control needed for complex speech. Based on such anatomical clues, some researchers suggest that Homo erectus might have had some form of proto-language, perhaps simpler than modern human language, but more complex than the communication systems of apes. Around 700,000 years ago, the fossil record shows new developments. In Africa, we start to see fossils that are transitional between Homo erectus and later forms. These are sometimes grouped under names like Homo heidelbergensis. These hominids had brains approaching the size of modern humans, ranging from about 1,200 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. They made more sophisticated tools, using a technique called prepared core technology, where a stone core would be carefully shaped before striking off a finished tool. This required even more planning and skill than earlier techniques. Populations of these archaic humans also migrated out of Africa, spreading into Europe and Asia. In Europe, these populations would eventually evolve into Neanderthals. In Asia, they would give rise to other archaic human populations, including the enigmatic Denisovans. In Africa, these populations would evolve into modern humans, Homo sapiens. So by a few 100,000 years ago, the world was inhabited by multiple species of humans. This is a key point. For most of human history, we weren't alone. Multiple human species coexisted, sometimes in the same regions. Let's focus on Neanderthals for a moment. Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, evolved in Europe and Western Asia around 400,000 years ago. They were superbly adapted to the cold climates of Ice Age Europe. Their bodies were stocky and muscular, with shorter limbs relative to their trunk, a body plan that conserves heat. Their faces had large noses, which may have helped warm and humidify cold air before it reached the lungs. They had large brains, actually on average slightly larger than those of modern humans, around 1,500 cubic centimeters. For a long time, Neanderthals were portrayed as brutish and unintelligent, but modern research has completely overturned this stereotype. Neanderthals were sophisticated. They made complex tools, including composite tools with multiple parts, like spears with stone points hafted to wooden shafts. They controlled fire, creating hearths for cooking and warmth. They cared for their sick and injured, with fossils showing individuals who survived serious injuries that would have required care from others. They buried their dead, sometimes apparently with grave goods, suggesting some form of symbolic thinking or ritual behavior. They created art, or at least decoration, with evidence of pigment use and engraved objects. In short, Neanderthals were capable, intelligent humans, adapted to their environment and culture. They lived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, successfully navigating the challenges of Ice Age climates. Meanwhile, in Africa, our own species was emerging. Homo sapiens, modern humans, evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. The earliest fossils that can be clearly identified as Homo sapiens come from sites in Morocco and Ethiopia, dating to about 300,000 to 315,000 years ago. These early Homo sapiens already had the basic anatomical features that characterize us. Rounded skulls, flat faces without the pronounced brow ridges of earlier humans, chins and slender, graceful skeletons. But anatomy isn't everything. What really sets Homo sapiens apart is our behavior, our culture, our capacity for symbolic thought. Around 100,000 years ago, we start to see clear evidence of modern human behavior. Artifacts like shell beads for personal adornment, showing a concern with identity and perhaps status. Complex tools, including microliths, tiny stone tools that would be mounted in composite weapons. Long-distance trade networks, with materials like obsidian found far from their sources, indicating exchange over long distances. And art, ochre pigments used for decoration, engraved objects, and eventually the magnificent cave paintings that would appear tens of thousands of years later. Language as we know it, with full grammatical complexity, almost certainly existed by this point. Language allows for the transmission of complex information, for planning, for storytelling, for the creation of shared myths and beliefs that can unite large groups of people. It's been argued that language and symbolic culture gave Homo sapiens a competitive advantage that would eventually allow our species to spread across the entire globe. Around 70,000 years ago, or perhaps earlier, some groups of Homo sapiens began to migrate out of Africa. This wasn't the first time humans had left Africa. Remember, Homo erectus did so nearly 2 million years earlier, and other archaic humans had also migrated. But this time, it was modern humans, carrying with them their advanced tools, their art, their complex language, and their flexible, innovative culture. These migrants spread into the Middle East, and from there they expanded in multiple directions. Some groups moved east, eventually reaching South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia by at least 65,000 years ago. The journey to Australia required crossing significant water barriers, suggesting these early humans had boats or rafts, and the cognitive skills to plan and execute sea voyages. Other groups moved north and west into Europe, arriving around 45,000 years ago. And yet, others spread across Asia, eventually crossing the land bridge that connected Asia to North America during the Ice Age, reaching the Americas by at least 15,000 years ago, possibly earlier. As Homo sapiens spread across the world, they encountered other human species. In Europe and Western Asia, they met Neanderthals. In Asia, they encountered Denisovans and possibly other archaic human populations. What happened when these different humans met? For a long time, the assumption was that modern humans simply replaced other species, either through competition for resources or through conflict. But DNA evidence has revealed a more complex and fascinating story. When scientists first sequenced the Neanderthal genome in 2010, they discovered something unexpected. The DNA of modern non-African humans contains about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. This means that at some point, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals didn't just coexist, they interbred. Some of the offspring of these unions survived and reproduced, passing Neanderthal genes into the modern human gene pool. Similarly, DNA from Denisovans, known primarily from a few bones found in a cave in Siberia, shows up in the genomes of modern populations in Oceania and Asia. Some populations in Papua New Guinea and Australia carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. Even more surprisingly, recent genetic studies have found hints of other, as yet unidentified, archaic human populations whose DNA survives in small amounts in modern African populations. This tells us that the story of modern human origins isn't a simple tale of one species replacing all others. It's a story of multiple human species, sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating, and sometimes intermingling. We carry within our DNA traces of these other humans, genetic legacies of encounters tens of thousands of years ago. As Homo sapiens spread across the world, they adapted to an enormous range of environments: tropical rainforests, deserts, grasslands, Arctic tundras, high mountains, islands. In each environment, populations developed local adaptations. Some of these adaptations are visible, like skin color, which varies with latitude and UV exposure. Others are less visible, like genetic adaptations to high altitude in Tibetan populations, or adaptations to digest specific foods, like the lactase persistence that allows many adults to digest milk, a trait that evolved in populations with a history of dairy farming. These populations also developed diverse cultures, languages, technologies, and belief systems. By 10,000 years ago, as the last ice age was ending, humans inhabited every continent except Antarctica. And then, around this time, something revolutionary happened. Agriculture. Instead of hunting and gathering, which humans had done for hundreds of thousands of years, some populations began to deliberately plant and cultivate crops and domesticate animals. This agricultural revolution, which arose independently in several regions around the world, would transform human society. Agriculture allowed for larger populations, since farming can produce more food per unit of land than foraging. It led to settled life, as farmers needed to stay near their fields. It led to surplus food production, which could support specialists who didn't produce food themselves. Craftspeople, warriors, priests, rulers. This in turn led to complex societies, hierarchies, cities, states, and eventually civilizations. The rest, as they say, is history. Written history, which only begins around 5,000 years ago, covers a tiny fraction of the human story. Everything before that, the millions of years from our ape-like ancestors to the first agricultural societies, is prehistory known to us through fossils, artifacts, and DNA. But it's no less real or important for being prehistory. Every step along the way, every adaptation, every innovation, every migration shaped who we would become. The Neanderthals who lived in Ice Age Europe, the Homo erectus who first learned to control fire, the Australopithecus who first walked upright, Lucy picking her way across the African savannah 3 million years ago. All of these are part of our story, part of the chain of ancestry that links us to the deep past. Today, all humans belong to a single species, Homo sapiens. Despite superficial differences in appearance, we are all remarkably similar genetically. The genetic differences between human populations are far smaller than the differences you'd find in most other mammal species. This reflects our recent common ancestry. All modern humans descended from populations that lived in Africa within the last few 100,000 years. We are, in evolutionary terms, a very young species. Species like crocodiles or sharks have existed largely unchanged for millions of years. We've been around, in our modern form, for only about 300,000 years. And yet in that short time, we've accomplished extraordinary things. We've spread to every corner of the planet. We've developed thousands of languages and cultures. We've created art, music, literature, philosophy, science. We've built cities, monuments, civilizations. We've landed on the moon, sent probes beyond our solar system, sequenced our own genome, and begun to understand our own origins. And that understanding, the understanding of where we came from, is relatively recent. Just 150 years ago, when Darwin published On the Origin of Species, the idea that humans evolved from earlier forms of life was controversial and poorly understood. Today, supported by overwhelming evidence from fossils, anatomy, DNA, and many other lines of inquiry, the story of human evolution is one of the best supported theories in all of science. It's a story that continues to be refined and elaborated as new fossils are discovered, new DNA is analyzed, and new insights emerge. But the basic outline is clear. We are apes. Specifically, we are African great apes, closely related to chimpanzees and gorillas. Our lineage split from that of chimpanzees around 7 million years ago, and since then, we've evolved along our own path, developing traits like bipedalism, large brains, complex language, and advanced technology. Many species have arisen along this path, flourished for a time, and then gone extinct. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, Denisovans, each left their mark on human culture and genetics. And so, over millions of years, through countless generations, through migrations, adaptations, innovations, and occasional intermingling with other human species, we arrive at ourselves, modern humans. Homo sapiens, with our large brains, our upright posture, our dexterous hands, our complex language, and our capacity for symbolic thought. Look at your hands for a moment. Those hands, with their opposable thumb and sensitive fingers, are inherited from millions of years of evolution. They could grasp branches in the forests of ancient primates. They could shape stones into tools in the hands of Homo habilis. They could control fire in the hands of Homo erectus. They could paint animals on cave walls in the hands of early Homo sapiens. And now, they can type on keyboards, play musical instruments, perform delicate surgeries, and create technologies our ancestors could never have imagined. Your brain, that incredibly complex structure that houses your thoughts, memories, and emotions, is the result of millions of years of gradual expansion from chimpanzee-sized brains of 3 million years ago to brains 3 times larger today. This growth was fueled by better diets, complex social challenges, and the advantages of language and culture. Your ability to walk upright, something you do without thinking, is a legacy of ancestors like Lucy, who moved through the African grasslands 3 million years ago. Your language, with its complex grammar and infinite vocabulary, derives from innovations that probably date back only 100,000 years, but which completely transformed what it means to be human. Even your genes carry traces of this long journey. If you're of non-African descent, you carry pieces of Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA. Genetic memories of the encounters your ancestors had with these other human species tens of thousands of years ago. If you're of African descent, you carry the oldest and broadest genetic diversity, reflecting the fact that humanity spent most of its evolutionary history in Africa. It's an extraordinary story. This story of how we went from apes to humans. It wasn't a straight line, an orderly progression from lower to higher forms. It was a branching, bushy tree with many species arising, thriving for a time, and then going extinct. Only one lineage, ours, continues into the present, carrying with it the legacy of all those past evolutionary experiments. And this story continues. Evolution hasn't stopped. Even now, as we sit here, evolution continues. It's just that its effects are slow, imperceptible over the course of a single lifetime. But over thousands or millions of years, our descendants might be as different from us as we are from Homo erectus. What does the future hold? It's impossible to say. Perhaps we'll continue to evolve biologically, adapting to new environments or challenges. Perhaps technology will become so integrated into our lives that biological evolution will be overtaken by cultural and technological evolution. Or perhaps, through understanding our genome, we'll begin to direct our own evolution in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. But whatever the future, the story of the past remains fascinating. It's a story of resilience, of adaptation, of innovation. It's a story of individuals who struggled to survive, who cared for their young, who cooperated with their groups, who created tools and art and language. It's a story that connects us not just to our parents and grandparents, but to an unbroken chain of ancestors stretching back through millions of years to creatures that climbed trees in African forests. So the next time you look at another person, remember, you share this story, you share these common ancestors, you share this incredible evolutionary journey from apes to humans. And when you look at a chimpanzee, or a gorilla in a zoo, or see one in a documentary, remember they're not our ancestors, but they are our cousins. We share a common ancestor not so far back in evolutionary terms. Their lineage took one path, ours another, but we're all part of the same tree of life, all made of the same basic material, all products of the same process of evolution by natural selection that has shaped life on this planet for billions of years. It's a perspective that can be both humbling and inspiring. Humbling because it reminds us that we're not separate from nature, not created separately from other forms of life, but an integral part of the natural world. Inspiring because it shows us what the process of evolution is capable of, how simple raw materials, atoms and molecules, can over eons give rise to eyes that see, brains that think, hearts that feel, hands that create. We are made of stardust, as Carl Sagan once said, but we're also made of millions of years of evolution, of adaptation and selection. We're the product of forests and savannas, of ice ages and warm climates, of migrations across continents and adaptations to new environments. We're the product of cooperation and competition, of innovation and tradition, of language and culture. In you, in me, in every human alive today lies the culmination of this extraordinary story. Every breath you take, every thought you think, every movement you make is made possible by structures that evolved over millions of years to bring you exactly here at this moment. So as this exploration comes to an end, as your mind perhaps begins to drift toward sleep, carry this awareness with you. You're part of something incredibly ancient and incredibly vast. You're the latest chapter, for now, of a story that stretches back through countless generations, and that story continues forward through you, in your children and your children's children, forward into a future we can only imagine. Close your eyes now. Let the weight of millions of years of evolution lull you to sleep. Dream, if you wish, of African forests and open savannas, of early tools and primitive fires, of migrations across unknown continents, of encounters between different human species, of cave paintings and ancestral songs sung under starry skies. You're part of this story. You're the result of this story, and this story, the story of how we went from apes to humans, is your story. Sleep deeply, and thank you for taking this journey through time with me. If you found this exploration interesting, I invite you to leave a like or subscribe. Your support makes these peaceful journeys through knowledge possible. Good night, and remember, you're made of stars and evolutionary history, a miracle of billions of years of cosmic and biological development. This thought perhaps can bring a sense of peace and wonder as you fall asleep.